Hi, everyone. I'm going to be frantically admitting people to our meeting here and acting as the bouncer for the moment. I see Jeff has joined. I will give him the privileges he needs to run this session here. Give me 1 second. There we go. All right, Jeff, you should have co-host permissions, and I'll be admitting people, and just let me know. I'm happy to introduce you. Amy's here as well,
Sure.
and Amy will be your moderator for the session. So I'll be quiet and pass everything on to Amy.
Great. Hi.
Hi.
So I guess I'll just try to start setting up the make sure it's showing the way I want it to for you.
Yeah, go ahead. And I'll start admitting people.
And I'm happy to help you out with that as well, Amy.
Awesome.
All right, you guys see the main slide?
Yep, I see it.
And are you seeing the captioning as well?
Yes. I have a
Great.
question about the captioning,
Mhm.
actually. Is that like a third-party tool that you're using, or?
You know what's awesome about this, Amy, is it's not. It's now integrated into PowerPoint as an add-in.
Oh, okay. I was wondering because I know Zoom does it, but it's like this integration that you have to set up and, so.
Yeah, well, you can see it's not perfect because it thought I said Italian.
Hey, but at least it's trying, right?
Yeah, so it's just Google it, excuse me, auto captioning in PowerPoint. You have to have, if I remember right, you have to have Windows 10
Okay.
or newer, but I could be wrong on that. But anyway, just go check it out. It is essentially like an add-in that you have to turn on.
Nice.
And it works the way you see it right here. And so, Amy, you're going to manage the chat for me as well, I'm guessing?
Yes, I'll be taking a look at the chat, and then I will try to direct people to ask the questions at the end. But if I can answer things, I will. If there's any points that you want me to stop, or you want to stop and look at that, that might be helpful.
I do actually. There's a couple of points where I wouldn't mind getting participant questions just through, if you can just turn on their mic for them. So I'll maybe ask them to raise their hand. And then if you can monitor who's raising their hand and maybe turn on their mic and let them ask whatever question or make a comment.
Yeah, that
Does
works.
that work for you? Okay,
Yep.
Great. So you're at CU Denver, is that right?
Yep, I'm at CU Denver, and I work in the Office of Digital Education. And formerly we were called CU Online, but now it's the Office of Digital Education. But anyway, yes, I'm at CU Denver.
Okay, well, I met Scott Chadwick at one of your team's presentations some time ago when you were essentially trying to get the word out about the services that you're going to provide to the unit. It was at the Lawrence Street Center. Do you remember that?
Yes, yep.
A while ago, it was a while ago. So I learned a little bit about your program there. It's intriguing to me what you guys are doing. What I really like is the future that you guys have in front of you in your office and what you guys are doing. So it's exciting, the stuff you guys are doing.
Yeah, it's super exciting. And honestly, like since everything's happened with COVID-19, our office has just been, like everybody's office, just flooded.
Exactly.
My trainings that I used to have, I'd have like maximum 25 people. Now we're like in the 200s.
Yeah.
So
Isn't it great?
I mean, it's really cool.
You probably realize, like I do, that it is kind of a double-edged sword, that so many people might think that this is what online learning really looks like and maybe be turned away from it when it's not, right?
Right. Yeah, I
And
think about that
others,
too.
yeah, others might see the potential that online learning has and realize, okay, this isn't really what it's like, but I'll bet it's a lot better than this, at least for those that know how to do it well. And so I see it as a double-edged sword. We'll see how it all turns out when all of this, clears up. My wife is a principal in Denver, and she's, in fact, I can hear her right now outside the office here, Zooming with her faculty and talking about how to do online learning, right? Or actually, they don't call it online learning in DPS, thankfully. They call it remote learning, which I know that Susana Cordova is sensitive to the fact that this isn't online learning in the traditional sense. Funny, I call it the traditional sense, right?
Right. We talk about the terminology all the time. We're like, it is not online learning. They're just doing things remotely now.
Yeah. You're gonna hear me drop a term in this presentation that I used in my dissertation. It just seems to me the right term, and I'm happy to receive pushback, but you'll hear me refer to our adult or non-traditional students as neo-traditional students. And that's just what I prefer to call them, because they are, they do represent the majority of IHE and post-secondary learners today. They have for almost 20 years. So, this model of being an adult learner taking online courses is the fastest growing model in higher education,
Right.
at least as far as percentage growth goes, right? And so I'm just going to drop the term neo-traditional. They're the new traditional, in my opinion. Get used to it.
Yeah.
So how many folks do we have hanging out in this session so far?
It looks like we have 33. I think that includes me and you. So 30,
Okay.
31.
And I'm not the one admitting them, right? That's you?
No, I am. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just double checking the names, just because, the times I have been in a Zoom bombing incident, it's been like professor did it on. So you like kind of figure it out right away.
So you actually has it actually come to fruition, or did you not, catch it before it?
That one, this happened in somebody posted the Zoom link public for like a yoga event with the university, and that's what they admitted the person, and then bad things happened. But that was the name of the person. I'm like, that's like a dead giveaway.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
So anyway.
Wow. I mean, Zoom bombing isn't making the news, but it's, there's still over 200 million Zoom sessions every day that don't get Zoom bombed. So it's almost like your odds of being Zoom bombed are, you're better odds to win the lottery than to be lucky enough to get Zoom bombed. But I guess it happens.
All right. We have like roughly 40 people now.
Okay, great. And so right now I've got my Zoom screen over my main PowerPoint screen, but you don't see my Zoom screen, right? Because I hope I've shared just the app, not my screen. Is that
I can only see your screen.
Awesome. That way I can kind of keep an eye on the gallery view if folks want to turn on their cameras.
Okay, I think you should be good to start. We got about a little over 40.
Okay. Thank you. And you're going to do an introduction?
Yes. So, hello, everyone. My name is Amy Arnold. I am from CU Denver, and today we have When Worlds Collide with Jeff Renfrow. So thank you so much for joining today. If you do have any questions, please direct those to the chat window. So if you're looking at the toolbar with Zoom, you should be able to see the chat there. You can go ahead and ask your questions there, and I will try to relay those to Jeff, and he'll also be moderating that chat as well. And I think he'll have a couple times in this presentation where he'll pause and give you a chance to ask those questions, and I'll be unmuting you at that time, and you can verbally ask those questions. So again, thank you so much, Jeff, for presenting today. We are happy that you're here. So let's go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Amy. So hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Renfrow. Amy, I don't know if you know this, I am going to be graduating this spring with my EDD from CU Denver in educational equity and executive leadership. So we have that connection in common. And but this presentation actually isn't about technically it's not about my doctoral dissertation work. It's more related to my day job, my work at Colorado Christian University, where I'm the director of teacher education programs at the undergraduate level. And I work at CCU in a college called the College of Adult and Graduate Studies, where we have programming for neo-traditional students all over the world. And so I'm gonna go ahead and tell you a little bit about that history. At least in where I'm at in the School of Education Professions a few years ago, we decided there was a moral imperative for us to begin offering our teacher prep programs online so we could meet the needs of our rural communities and our neo-traditional students living in remote parts of Colorado. As you all probably know, Colorado is a very big state geographically speaking, and most of it, the vast majority of it is rural. And so we wanted to be able to basically increase access to becoming a teacher to our friends in rural Colorado. So we went online, fully online, with our teacher prep programs a few years ago. And I should back up and say, prior to my work here at CCU, I was a teacher and a principal in K-12 for about 25 years. So that's just a little bit about my background, but I've been doing this work here as the director at CCU for going on 5 years now. But anyway, when we developed these programs to go fully online to meet the needs of our rural communities particularly, one thing that happened is we realized we were starting to get phone calls from folks who wanted to be teachers but didn't live in Colorado. They saw that we had this fully online program, and they were calling our enrollment counselors to see if they could join us. And that wasn't originally our intention when we went online, but it was a great outcome. We were excited to hear that folks around the world actually would be interested in taking our fully online teacher education programs. So now, a few years after going fully online, we have students all around the world who want to become teachers and get their license here in Colorado. They reciprocate their licenses to wherever they reside. And so it's just an exciting time for us to be able to offer this program fully online. So that's the backstory. But what's happened is when we went fully online in Colorado, we weren't really facing a whole lot of issues that were related to geographic distancing, so geographically diverse students, culturally diverse students, in the sense that our Colorado community, although they were diverse, not nearly as diverse as possibly the students that we'd be reaching around the world that we do now. And also issues around time, so temporally diverse, if you will, students when we went online worldwide. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you today is some of the lessons that we've learned in extending our online programs to a global audience. And I also want to try to get some feedback from you all about things you've learned, challenges you're facing, and I'd like for us to have some time, hopefully, to interact with one another by literally turning on our microphones, or I guess Amy will have to turn on the microphones for us. But nevertheless, I'd like for us to be able to have some interactive time as well, where we can share our challenges of worldwide, global, synchronous online learning. The reason why the synchronous part is so important in our presentation today. And so our three outcomes that I'd like for us to try to focus on as we're going through the presentation is, one, I'd like for you to be able to articulate the 4 dimensions of online learning. And of course, I'll be going into what those 4 dimensions of online learning are. If anybody was in the session with Seth, the IVC session at 9 o'clock, he talked about actually the 3rd dimension of online learning. So this is going to be extending that into the 4th dimension. Our second outcome that I'd like for us to focus on is I want you to be able to think about the courses that you're teaching or the courses that you're developing or leading, and consider how the 4th dimension might be presenting access and equity challenges for your students and for your instructors. I'm going to be sharing my experiences with my programs in the 3rd and 4th dimensions, but I want you to always have that lens of the perspective of you and your audience, your students, and your they might be impacted by the third and fourth dimensions. And then finally, if we have time, I'd really like for us to, again, have some dialogue about solving some of the challenges that you're experiencing with your online programs in the third and the fourth dimensions. So those are our 3 goals today. Before we get started, does anyone have any questions? And if you do, you can just raise your hand in the chat, or just chat that you have a question. And then Amy, if you wouldn't mind just turning on their microphone and letting them ask the question, that would be awesome. So keep an eye on that. I can't actually see the chat right now. So Amy, I'm going to keep moving on, but please interrupt me if somebody does have a question before we get started. And while we're waiting for those questions, if you want to log on to Poll Everywhere, this is the URL that you'll want to go to. I would suggest opening a new tab on a keyboard-enabled device, because there is one where you would be typing in some narrative, so it might be easier than a phone. But nevertheless, use whatever device you're comfortable with. But pollev.com / / I guess, Jeff Renfrow 250, and you'll be able to participate in some of the live polls and feedback. So here's the first one. I'd like for you all, if you don't mind, to please click, and you can click more than once on this map, where your students are around the world. Now, I know some of us, many of you, are all over the world right now. You're not all in Colorado. So what I'd really like to know is if you can sort of estimate where some of your students who are not geographically close to your host institution are. So if you're in Taipei, Thailand, don't click on Taipei, Thailand for your students that are there. Click on a place that's farther away from Taipei, if you in fact have students that are geographically diverse beyond just your local area. Go ahead and start showing some of those geographically diverse students on this map. Waiting to see our Southern Hemisphere represented. It's actually going to be an important part of our talk today. I'll go ahead and add a couple for us. CCU. There we go. All right, well, you can continue to be posting some of those locations while I talk. It's just really neat. I mean, this is so exciting to see that we as educators are able to reach literally all over the world, and really the only requirement typically is that they have some sort of access to an internet, and so this is really neat to see. And we'll talk a little bit about that internet access equity issue a little bit later on. But thank you for sharing where some of your students are. It looks like our southernmost student would be in South Africa, is what it looks like. So nobody in the southern tip of Chile or Argentina to beat that person as far as southern latitudes go. But and nobody in Australia, interesting, or New Zealand. There's Australia. Australia just got populated. Very good. Well, thank you for that, everybody. Just wanted to kind of get an idea of if we are actually an audience of folks who are serving students all over the world, as I expected we would be. We certainly are. So let's talk a little bit about the 4 dimensions of online learning. The first 2 dimensions, which you might already guess, is the dimensions of height and width, which comes in the flatness of our computer screens, our computer monitors. And online learning started out primarily within dimension 1 and 2, which is where it's essentially like the electronic version of a correspondence course. And so, that's the early beginnings of online learning, is serving students academically in dimensions 1 and 2. When we add the 3rd dimension to online learning, what we're talking about here is online learning that attracts or serves students that are geographically diverse. So that 3rd dimension of space or geography is added into this mix. So in dimension 1 and 2, it's asynchronous, and it's serving students who are Well, they could be anywhere if it's asynchronous, but primarily the model is that it's asynchronous learning and it's with students that are geographically close to wherever the host institution is. There aren't too many programs, honestly, that still function in just the first two dimensions, but it's still worth mentioning. In the third dimension, we're still asynchronous, which means essentially we are not meeting in the same time, so we can do our work whenever we want to do it, submit it when it's due, but we are functioning on our own and setting our own schedules. But we're adding students that are geographically dispersed or geographically diverse. When we add in the fourth dimension of online learning, what we're talking about here is the dimension of time. And so now we are adding a synchronous element to our teaching and learning. And that actually throws a lot of challenges into the world of teaching and learning in online learning. So again, one is traditional, working off the screen, asynchronously, geographically close to the host institution. Dimension 3 is adding geographically diverse students, but still they're working asynchronously. We haven't added the dimension of time. And then dimension 4 is geographically dispersed online students who also are being engaged synchronously in one or more ways throughout their course or their program. All right, so that's the overview of the 4 dimensions of online learning. And if anybody has questions along the way, again, please just raise your hand or ask Amy to turn on your microphone or post it in the chat and Amy will chime in. So I'd like for you now to take a quick poll, if you don't mind, and considering the 4 dimensions that we just talked about, what is the highest dimension that you're functioning in within your courses or programs? And I know this is a tough question for some of you. If you're an administrator, you have a lot of courses and programs you're working with. Just try to think of the program that's functioning in the highest dimension. And by the way, highest doesn't necessarily mean better. So please don't misunderstand me when I say that, although there is some research to argue that if done well, the higher you can get in these dimensions, or the more dimensions you can include, the higher quality the learning is. So, but that wasn't the intention of today's presentation. And I see nobody is choosing choice D just to be cheeky. I threw that in there for those that like to be cheeky. I would really love to pick your brain if you have some ideas of how to work online in parallel dimensions within the multiverse. All right, so it looks like we have a bell-shaped curve actually, with the dimension 3 being the majority, but not, I don't think that would be a significant difference statistically. But anyway, we have basically a fair 3. All right, thank you for that feedback. Gives me a little bit of, oh, look at that, now we're perfectly even. Gives me a little bit of a grounding of my audience, so I appreciate you guys sharing that with me. All right. So we've come a long way actually in improving equitable practices in online learning in the first 2 dimensions, and even in the third dimensions. We still have ways to go in creating truly equitable and fully accessible online programming in any of the dimensions, but even in dimensions 1 and 2, which have been around the longest. Really, the focus of our time today is going to be about equity issues and considerations around dimensions 3 and 4, the dimensions of location, and then the dimension of time. So I'm going to share some of the problems that we as a unit knew we were going to run into when we took our programs fully online and worldwide. And really the challenges that we predicted, and then even some that we didn't, and they came along later, and I'm going to share what we've learned from those and how we resolved them. And I really want to know how you guys might resolve those or also have resolved some of these challenges. But anyway, what it came down to when I started making my list of the challenges in the third dimension, so now we're not talking about synchronous elements here, we're just talking about adding students around the world and serving them asynchronously. So these are the challenges. They came into 2 categories. Really, it was location, the challenge of location, and the challenge of language. All right, and so I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into what those challenges were and still are. So with location, one of the things that you're going to want to consider, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to present this from the perspective that maybe you're considering going into the third and fourth dimensions with your online learning programs. So that's how I'm going to talk, all right, even if you're already there. If you're thinking about going into the third dimension with your programs, you're going to want to think about adding foreign education transcript analysis into your program. You know, that's already common in just about every university that I'm aware of. But just know that if your program has never dove into this idea of having students join you from around the world, and now I'm talking about from around the world. These are not green card students who are physically in the United States. They are still in their country of origin. Okay, so you're absolutely going to be needing to integrate foreign education transcript analysis programming into your program if you don't have it already. The other thing you're going to want to consider, like for me as a teacher education administrator, we are offering licensure programs to our students. And so if you're in a counseling program or a nursing program or an architecture program, there's licensing and certification considerations that you're going to want to consider when you're thinking about including students that are geographically diverse around the world or even around the United States. And what I mean by that is, does your licensing body or your certifying body have requirements when it comes to nationality or citizenship? Because you obviously ethically don't want to be offering a program to a student who can't ultimately get the license at the end of the rainbow of your program. You don't want to take their money and make them go through all that effort and time. So consider the licensing and certification restrictions that might be beyond your control as an institution, because they are restrictions at your licensing agency or your certification agency. Now for us in the teacher prep program here, students are getting their license through CDE, so our licensure programs are authorized by the Colorado Department of Education. And so any student that successfully completes our program can get a Colorado Department of Education teaching license, except if that student does not have a social security number, because that's a licensure requirement for the CDE. So students, if they're in another country and they are not American citizens living abroad, and actually this just happened to me this week. I have a student that wants to join our program from Nigeria. She's a Nigerian national. She has lived in the United States under a green card. She went back to Nigeria to start an early childhood program, but she wants to get her license. We are trying to work through that right now with her because she wants to do that from Nigeria. And so we have to figure that out. And we think we're going to be able to find a way to do that for her. But it's just something for you to consider if you have licensure or for your programming. How does the addition of students that are not United States citizens impact that? Now, if you're not familiar with the National Council for State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements, it's also called SARA or SARA agreements. This is something you're going to want to look at, especially if you are offering your students, your programs to students beyond Colorado. Essentially, this organization provides a clearinghouse, if you will, or it's an association of states who agree that they're going to allow their programs. Well, let me back up a little bit. States can enter into SARA agreements, but individual universities and IHEs have to also then add themselves into that agreement. And so like at CCU, we are a part of the SARA agreements when it comes to our programs. So what that means is if a student in Florida wants to take our teacher prep program from Florida, that's going to be okay. There's not going to be a problem with that. This SARA agreement is essentially, think of it like a reciprocity agreement, if you will. We agree that that degree means the same in Florida as it does in Colorado, essentially, for our online students that are taking it from Florida. Okay. Now, there are some, licensure tweaks to that. SARA doesn't guarantee licensure reciprocities. That's a different thing that you would have to look into if your program is a licensure program. It only guarantees essentially that the degree itself is valid and that the student can take it from a state other than, in our case, Colorado. So that's something you'll want to look into is the NC SARA. Another thing to consider when you start offering your programs remotely, and we ran into this even in Colorado when we went to students that are rural is internet access. That is an equity issue that's still there, although we're making great progress in getting internet access into rural communities around the country. We're still not 100% yet. And so you're going to need to consider how are you going to vet your students to ensure they have adequate internet for your program, whatever that looks like. Now for us, we run remote, or we call them virtual field observations. And we're going to actually, I'll get to that next. I'll go ahead and go there. Our virtual observation protocols, when our field coaches observe the teachers out in the field, they aren't there physically with the teacher in the classroom. They are observing using web-based video technologies. And we have a few different protocols that we use. One of them is asynchronous, the other one is synchronous, and we kind of mix it up, and there's benefits to both. But the bottom line is, if the student on the other end does not have reliable internet, they will not be.
Uh-oh, Jeff, you're muted. Can you hear me? Jeff. Hey, Jeff, really quick, can you hear me? You're muted. Jeff, can you hear me? You're muted. Jeff. Jeff. Jeff, we can't hear you. He's unmuted on Zoom, guys. It's just, I think he must have done something with his headset that caused his microphone to mute on his end. He's unmuted on the in Zoom. So, and I can't get his attention. He must not be able to hear me. Can you all hear me talking? Okay, so I don't know, he's not able to hear me for some reason. I'm waving, I'm trying to give him the cue. Everybody wave. Let me see here. I'll try to share my screen just to get him to maybe stop for a second. Okay, there we go. Can you hear? Hi, Jeff. We could not hear the last probably 5 minutes or so.
Oh, no.
And you weren't muted in Zoom. It was something going on with your headset that it muted, and I was waving.
Yep. Oh,
so
I'm
sorry.
See. Yeah.
I was like, oh,
so sorry.
Somebody gave me a suggestion to interrupt the screen share because I was like, he can't hear me.
Yeah. No, that's what we need to
I'm
do.
sorry. Here, I'll stop sharing.
Can you see the main slide again?
You're gonna have to reshare.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Sorry about that.
No problem. We'll get there. All right. Tell me if we've got it back.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Good. And it's saying on your screen, it still has like a little red muted button. I can hear you, but I think it must be something to do with your headset or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I've unplugged my headset completely.
Okay. I think
hopefully we'll get through the rest. Well, in the interest of time, I am probably not going to be able to backtrack too much, but I'll just summarize and say, the virtual observation protocols, essentially, if you have any requirements for your students to engage in video-based, asynchronous video-based interactions, you're going to want to make sure essentially that they have the tools to be able to do that, skill to be able to do that. And what I was saying is, you know, in traditional college, you have to have reliable transportation to get to school, right? That's just a given. It's a cost of doing college. And in online school, you have to have reliable internet and reliable hardware, laptop or other peripherals that are necessary for the program. And that's how I explain it to students at their interview is you need to be willing to invest a little bit to make sure you have strong internet and solid hardware so that you can get to your classes, just like you did when you had a car to get to college. It's just a cost of doing business. And you have to know how to drive that car, right? That's the other important thing. We did talk about nationality limitations earlier, but one of the things that came up this year for the first time was parcel delivery. We have a student in Peru, and she's in remote Peru. They have internet there, but what they don't have is a delivery service, or at least a reliable and timely delivery service, like UPS or DHL or something like that. And in our program, students have their books delivered to them ahead of time before class through a butler service, or they're going to have digital versions, but there are some books that we can't get digitally, so they have to be physically mailed to the students. And she couldn't get the book on time. This was new to us, and we now realize that we have to add that element into our admissions process to ask them, do you have reliable parcel delivery so that you can get your textbooks on time? If you don't, then this may not be the program for you. Just something we never even thought about when we went fully online until it actually happened. And then the other thing too is, like, for us, these teacher candidates need to have access to a very important requirement in the field, which is access to a school. So if you're a counseling, architecture, nursing, doctoral program, same question would apply if you're going to go online, is verify that, or at least disclose to the student that they're going to need to be able to have access to this field-based requirement, a school, or a clinic, or whatever it might be. They need to have access to those things wherever they're living. We can't possibly have a relationship with every school in the world now that we've gone worldwide, so we have to disclose that important thing to the students. Where we used to find those placements for them here in Colorado, we just can't do that anymore. They have to be able to navigate that process in this new online worldwide model that we're in. So are there any questions about Dimension 3? Before we go on to Dimension 4, or actually we're going to talk about languages next. So
I do have a question. What if students rely on public services like libraries for internet? Any suggestions for how to help students who are now stuck at home?
Who are not, well, so a lot of cell phone services now and smartphones have hotspot capability. And I don't think a lot of people even know if their phone has that ability through their 4G network. But yeah, it's interesting. I read once that more people worldwide have cell phones than laptops or desktop computers, which I guess makes a lot of sense. And it's very likely that they could use those cell phones as a hotspot if their plan allowed for it. So that would be the first thing I would say. I had a student a couple of years ago who didn't have internet at her house. She was in rural Colorado, and they just didn't have internet yet in her neighborhood. So she would drive to the local library. After the library was closed, they left the internet on for her, and she would do it out in the parking lot. It had a strong enough signal that she could engage in her webinars out in the parking lot. So, students can be very creative about how they access their internet. The biggest challenge we have in my program is so when our teachers are out there doing their field observations and they're relying on, video-based web applications, which are huge bandwidth draws, as we all know. Some schools don't have a robust enough network to really make that a good quality experience. And so that's been our bigger challenge, actually, than perhaps people at home being able to access the internet. Any other questions? So the second element of Dimension 3 that we ran into challenges with was language. So we're offering our program to students around the world. We're predicting that this is going to become more of a challenge for us, an equity gap that we're going to have to do a better job closing. And so we're already kind of talking about how we're going to do that. Currently at CCU and most universities, when you have a student that is not a native English speaker or is not an American citizen, they'll take a test like the TOEFL test to try to demonstrate proficiency if it's a necessary requirement of the program. We do that, we use TOEFL. But like to become a licensed teacher in the state of Colorado, we have an additional requirement that's a little more stringent than our university requirements for admitting international students and second language students than the standard set by the university for TOEFL. So we have a higher bar for TOEFL to enter the professional core for teaching. And that's because we need these teachers to have an English proficiency that is of such a level that they could teach students, right? Teach K-12 students and be a good model of the English language. So just keep that in mind too. Does your program or your licensure have a higher standard of English proficiency for your students? And if so, what are you going to do about that? Plan for it. And again, the language issue is now coming up a little bit more with my Nigerian candidate. One question that I had for her was, if you're going to be in a school in your community, is the English language going to be spoken in that classroom? Because we don't have any field coaches who would be able to observe a class that wasn't spoken in English. We could do Spanish, but and I can't remember what the language, the national language is in Nigeria. If somebody wants to post that, I'm sure that's a great question to answer, but it wasn't English, although English is widely spoken. And so she said, nope, not a problem. You know, she's actually an English major, interestingly enough, but she said, nope, the school will be an English-based school, so you'll be able to, observe me and understand what's happening in the classroom. But again, it's just a consideration. If you have field work and you've got a German student working in a German setting, are you going to be able to facilitate that and support that with your program? And then what if we start getting students, let's say we get a run on students from Thailand who want to take our program, one of our programs. We haven't had that yet, but we can kind of see the handwriting on the wall as our program is growing, and we actually are growing despite what's happening nationwide with teacher prep programs. Ours is growing, and we fully believe it because we went online and it's now global. But what if we get that cohort from Thailand, for example? Are we prepared to provide multiple languages in our programs, our courses, the discussions that we run, our webinars? How are we going to support students from around the world who might come in as a cohort with their native language? We don't have an answer for that yet, but we are thinking about it. What might we do in that scenario? Now, we do offer non-licensure teacher education programs. So these students, even though they don't speak English, could technically still enroll in our non-licensure programs and get the degree. So on this one, I think what we'll do, because of the time that I lost earlier, I'm going to forge ahead, but if somebody does have a burning question or a thought, go ahead and put it in the chat, and then Amy, if you could just kind of chat it out for me so I could hear it. But I'm going to move into the fourth dimension now and our considerations there when it comes to equity in the fourth dimension. So now we're adding synchronous activities to our geographically diverse students, all right? So now there's requirements that they do things at the same time. So obviously, the biggest challenge there is the challenge of time. We've got students in different time zones now. And it's surprising how that can affect students, some would say even marginalized students, because they are not in the dominant time zone, which in our is Denver. And speaking of the dominant time zone, you do need to set the standard for the time zone that you're in. Kay Novak, when she kicked off this morning's session at 8 o'clock, one of the things she said was, hey, everybody, the times we're talking about here are Denver time, right? Mountain Standard Time. That's really important to do when you're adding the fourth dimension to your programs. There's a time zone converter there. You can see it, the timezoneconverter.com. And that's kind of a cool little thing. What it is it allows you to add a link to an email. Let's say you're sending an email to a student, say, hey, let's meet at 4 o'clock in my Zoom room and have a chat. You can attach this time zone converter and set it up so that you can plug in 4 o'clock Denver. And then when you send that link to anybody, wherever they are, it automatically tells them what the time is in their time zone. Okay, so no more guessing about what time is that in Taipei, right? The time zone converter is just a link you can that meeting invitation. So just a little tip there for everybody. So yeah, synchronous course activities. Let's talk about that for just a minute. We've got things like discussions and lectures and webinars and field-based observations. These all in our program happen synchronously. We have a synchronous requirement. Actually, I take that back. The discussions are not yet synchronous, although we're going to be going towards that. I actually have a presentation tomorrow at 11 o'clock about essentially effective online discussions for neo-traditional students. So if you want to see that, it's 11 o'clock tomorrow. And I'm going to go into deeper detail about discussions tomorrow in synchronous formats. But the question is, what are you going to do about time zones when you have discussions? Well, I would suggest making them small group discussions, which is what I'll be expanding on tomorrow, so that students can then join each other at a time that works for them. And there's actually a lot of research that, in fact, my research was my dissertation is the effectiveness of synchronous small group discussions versus the traditional discussion model. So not only is it good practice in the fourth dimension, it's a good practice at any time in online learning. Your lectures and webinars, what are you going to do for your students that are, again, I'm going to use Type A because this morning at Seth's IVC presentation, he had a teacher named Fifi who was in Type A, and it was 12:30 in the morning there for her, when it was just 9 o'clock for us, or 9:30. And so what do we do about, our Fifis out there, our students that aren't really going to be able to attend well at 1, 2, or 3 in the morning? I have a student in Germany and in Dakar in a class that I'm teaching, and it's and Belgium, and it's 2:30 in the morning when I'm teaching my live webinar at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, what we do for them is we give them the option of watching the recorded webinar, right? It's not as rich and robust, they can't engage as much, but we do give them that option to watch the recording of the webinar, and then they submit a summary, a written summary of the key points that they took away from the webinar. So that's kind of where we're at right now in resolving that time zone issue in our webinars. Our field-based observations are also interesting because we do have a synchronous field-based observation where students have to teach real students, candidates have to teach real students, and they're being observed virtually by a field coach from CCU in Colorado or wherever else they may be. Well, the time zones really wreak havoc on that one as well. So it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Germany, but it's 3 in the morning in Colorado for the field coach. So essentially what we do for those students is we try to place them with a field coach that's as close to their time zone as possible, but that's not always so easy because most of our field coaches just happen to be here in Colorado. But it's a consideration that you're going to want to have to make when you have synchronous field-based activities. In the field-based activity is the calendar conflicts that can come up, and these are the socially constructed calendars that I talked about in the introduction to the session. There's a lot of celebrations, holidays, and other things happening in other countries and cultures that we aren't even aware of in the United States. That some of them take a day or two, and they're not in school, or they can't be in school during those times, or it could be a week or 2 weeks where you're just not going to be able to engage that student for those times. So, asking the students ahead of time, what are some calendar conflicts you might have with the synchronous requirements that we have in this program? And one of the ways we've done that is we have laid out all of the synchronous requirements 2 years out for our program, so they know, in August of 2021 at 5 p.m. on Thursday the 21st, we're going to have a live webinar. Is that going to be a problem for you? Take a look at your calendar. We have mapped it all out for them for 2 years in advance. And that to try to work through ways to make it work for them based on any unique calendar conflicts that they may have in their country, in their culture. The addition of hemispheres, that's why I wanted to see if we had any Southern Hemisphere folks. One of the things we ran into this year is we have a student that is in the Southern Hemisphere, and we have a course that runs, in fact, it's coming up here pretty soon. It runs in May, and for us, that's still, people are still in school, right? In the United States, typically in May, it's the end of the semester. But in the Southern Hemisphere, they're not, they're on break. And so field-based requirements were really difficult for this teacher because she couldn't really get to a school. So you're going to want to keep in mind when you go synchronous and you have synchronous requirements, especially field-based requirements, practice, that type of thing, what are you going to do about those calendars, those ways of navigating through the year that happen in different cultures, different countries, continents, and even hemispheres? It truly is a fourth dimension issue, and you're going to want to be considering that when you're setting it up. We are now to the last sort of slide of interaction. What I'd like to know is
Hey,
what are
Jeff,
some challenges that you have in leading your programs, or that you'd like us to try to help you with if you're considering going into the third and fourth dimensions with your online programs. If you have solutions, go ahead and put them in there. And then if I set this up right, let me turn it on here. If I set this up right, you'll be able to upvote the things that, shoot, I think it's active now. You'll be able to upvote those that are also important to you. And then if we have too many, we'll at least be able to start looking at those that got the most votes, so to speak.
Hi, Jeff.
Yes.
Sydney. I was just going to say that we have a hard stop right at 11:50.
Thank you.
To get over to the keynote, because I need to start that meeting. So I'll have to
I
end the
think,
meeting in about 7 minutes. I'm just giving you the heads up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we should be good. So I'm not seeing any posts there. Is it because people aren't able to, or maybe they just don't have anything to post?
It's saying poll is not yet active.
Really? Okay. Okay, I'm starting to see some now. Let me reshare everybody. So for number 2, the don't feel connected in the course if their only option. Trying to see what the rest of that was. I wonder if there's a limit on how long your post can be here on this particular one. When it comes to connection, I would, if this is where you were going with this, I would invite you to my 11 o'clock session tomorrow. It's all about increasing social presence, satisfaction, and learning in using a particular model of an online discussion. And it was a very positive outcome on that study as far as increasing social presence for students all over the world. Yeah, communication is huge. It absolutely is. You heard me mention many things that we predicted we needed to work through, but there were so many more that we never predicted, and we had to sort of respond and then add that protocol or that communication into our process of induction and preparation and in our handbooks and that type of thing. So absolutely. Yes, kinesthetic learning. If it actually requires something hands-on, it is difficult to implement online or through a video. Augmented reality and virtual reality is going to go a long way to remediate that for programs. We're not there yet. It's not scalable, in my opinion, and it's not completely seamless just yet. But boy, I predict in our lifetimes that's just going to be a game changer for those kinesthetic activities that we used to do physically. Yeah. Now I have 3 minutes left, and I do appreciate all of your questions, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and take us to the next slide, which is I just want to review. I was a teacher and a principal, and I teach a teacher prep program, or lead one anyway. So I have to review our intended outcomes, and hopefully you all feel like, and if you want to kind of do a thumbs up or thumbs down in the chat, do you feel like you could articulate the 4 dimensions of online learning to somebody, anybody, if they asked, what are the 4 dimensions? And I'm going to actually turn on the chat now. A yes or a maybe or a sort of in the chat would be great. Do you feel like you could identify elements in your course that might present access and equity issues or challenges in the 3rd and 4th dimension? That would be my next question. Now, we didn't get to number 3 very well. Unfortunately, I did want to have some time to kind of work through your posts, but with 2 minutes left, and Amy, not on you at all. It's on me for not getting this done a little quicker. We didn't really get to number 3, but hopefully you've got some ideas, some things, some notes you wrote down where you could start thinking about equity and access in the 3rd and 4th dimension from some of the lenses that I shared with you today, and apply it in a way that makes sense for your organization and the programs that you're leading. So the last slide here is that I want to invite you to send me an email if you'd like a copy of the presentation, jrenfrow@ccu.edu. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Greatly appreciate it. You're welcome, Rachel. Thank you. Hey, Ben Contop. It's good to see you, man. It's the first time I've turned on the chat, so now I can see who's in there.
Hey, thank you so much, Jeff. That was wonderful.
You're
I'm
welcome.
going to go ahead and I'll give it like 1 more minute. I'm going to end this meeting so we can hop into the keynote session. But thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And
Amy, thank you. Well done.
Please take the feedback survey, everyone. I provided that link in the chat, but it's also on the ELCC schedule as well. So it's the same feedback link for every session, every keynote today. So please take that survey.
Thanks again, Amy. Thank you, Eric. Shante, thank you. Thanks, Laura. Candy, good to see you, Candy. Hope you're doing well. Thanks, Josh. All right, I'm gonna